Hello friends, Eric here, and this is Bane Alley Magic. Today we're doing another deck tech video on one of my favorite commanders, Edgar Markov. It is from the 2017 Commander series, and all of these commanders all had eminence in common, which means they were able to do their commander abilities from the command zone, which makes them especially powerful. And I feel like it's been a while since I've seen a good Edgar Markov deck tech, especially since a lot of new vampire cards came out. So let's jump right into it. Alright, so here we go. This is Edgar Markov, and he's a legendary vampire knight for 6 mana. That's 3 of anything, and 1 red, 1 white, and 1 black. And he has Eminence, which says whenever you cast another vampire spell, if Eddie Mac is in the command zone or on the battlefield, create a 1/1 black vampire creature token. And he also has First Strike, Haste, and whenever Eddie Mac attacks, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire you control. It's fabulous. Just a great commander. Even when he comes out on the battlefield, a lot of the other Eminence commanders, they weren't that good once they came out. You mostly just kept him in the command zone, but Edgar Markov, he's great to take out. And I always like to think of him as like a gangster. I mean, here's a guy who's, obviously, surrounded by servants, and he's commanding vampires, and he's probably, he's got Mathis the Fiendseeker working with him, so he's putting out hits, and so I like to call him Eddie Mac, right? Because he just seems so tough and like such a thug, right? And all of his crew, they all have more crew and more thugs that each come with them, And so speaking of which, here's the true stars of the deck, the tokens. So how'd this get in there? Oh no, this is a token that I use a lot actually. For anything that I don't have a token for, I pull this token out because it's got star. And when you're playing a token deck, make your own tokens. That's the fun of the game. You're just making your own tokens. So I designed a lot of my own vampire tokens, but I wanted to start with this just to say, if you're running a token deck, anything that uses tokens, you're often going to find you don't have a token, or running any deck, you're often going to find, oh, I don't have a token for this. And that's really annoying because lots of people just use a die. They put a die down and says, oh, that represents my creature token. Well, that makes it super easy to forget that there's a creature there. So at least have a piece of paper, some kind of card that represents it. Don't just put a die down. So there's lots of websites that help you make your own tokens. So just look them up on Google, Magic Card Token Maker. You'll find a lot of really easy websites to help you print tokens. So this is a RLA from Dr. Slump. All right, now for the vampire tokens. You gotta make your own vampire tokens. So I just found some art, but I also wanted to do some awesome, funny tokens. One of Us, Lost Boys. Yeah. But From Dusk Till Dawn, more classic vampires. Oops. More From Dusk Till Dawn. Nosferatu, classic. The Count, 1. This is Vampire Hunter D. And then let's look at this geeky guy. Wizards, what's up? Why can't we get a decent looking lifelink vampire token? This is not the greatest artwork here. So I made my own. We got Interview with the Vampires, Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt. Yeah, way cooler. Alright, so I know the edges are messed up, but these are tokens. Who cares? Just make your own tokens. That's fun. Alright, so now on to the real mechanics of the Edgar Markov deck. Starting with some draw. Alright, Twilight Prophet is 2 of anything and 2 black. And it has flying, and it's a 2/4. It also has Ascend. Says if you control 10 or more permanents, you get the city's blessing for the rest of the game. So as you're casting this, or at any point in the game, if this is out and you have 10 or more permanents, you have the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. And so this Vampire Cleric also says, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have the City's Blessing, reveal the top card of your library and put it into your hand. Each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is that card's converted mana cost. Yeah, really busted, because most of the time, you know, black abilities that let you draw cards are making you lose life, so this is you gaining that life. And often, you know, you need things like this to gain life back from other black spells that have lost you life. So what a great card. Twilight Prophet, it's worth the money. Another draw spell is Champion of Dusk. For 3 of anything and 2 black, a Vampire Knight. When Champion of Dusk enters the battlefield, you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of vampires you control. And with Edgar Markov out, you can be drawing a lot of cards here with all those creature tokens. Dusk Legion Zealot, filling up our 2-drop slot and letting us draw a card. Doesn't seem very powerful, but man, drawing a card on like turn 2 is so good. It puts you, you know, back into the game. Just drawing cards at all is, you know, one of the most powerful abilities in the game. So don't underestimate any little guys that draw you cards. So when Dusk Legion Zealot enters the battlefield, you draw a card and lose 1 life, and it's a 1/1 Vampire Soldier. Next we got Viscera Seer. Sacrifice a creature and scry 1. It's a 1/1 Vampire Wizard for 1 black. And wow, this guy, I mean, he can really do great things in this deck, as you'll see later on. You know, we got some other cards that synergize with creatures dying, and most of all, it's just really great when someone's trying to exile your creature and you say, okay, well, I sacrifice it in response. You know, it's a better way to go, because then maybe you could potentially get it back. So Viscera Seer is a great candidate for a 1-drop slot in the Bloodlust deck. Anoan Ruin Sage. The Ruin Sage is a legendary vampire shaman, and it's a 3/3. No, sorry, it's a 4/3. And at the beginning of your upkeep, each player sacrifices a non-vampire creature. So that's only at the beginning of your upkeep. Which, when you play this card, you want to make clear, because everyone, for some reason, just always thinks that it's the beginning of everyone's upkeep. So you got to say, no, it's only at the beginning of mine. Which you want to make clear, because everyone's just going to hate him anyway. He gets a lot of hate. So try to protect him, but you got to keep him in the deck. Falconwrath Exterminator. For 1 of anything in a red, when Falconwrath Exterminator deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And for 2 of anything in a red, you can activate the ability which says Falconwrath Exterminator deals damage to target creature equal to the number of +1/+1 counters on Falconwrath Exterminator. So it enters as a 1/1, but this can get buffed up really quick, especially with some other cards in the deck, like Edgar Markov himself, putting +1/+1 counters on all your vampires. So this is actually a great card for this deck, one that I underestimated at first. Another 2-drop here is Legion Lieutenant, 1 white and 1 black. For a Vampire Knight, that's a 2/2, and it says other vampires you control get +1/+1. You know, this is one that's, you know, not in any of the deck tech videos I watch online, because all of them were made before this card came out. So obviously this is an add into any vampire deck. You know, it's our 2-drop lord, gotta have it. Sanctum Seeker. This card is so good. Whenever a vampire you control attacks, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So this is a great alternate win condition whenever they're, you know, preventing all the damage that you deal to them. You know, instead, this is a way to just drain their life. And it says each opponent, you know, so when one opponent has all those huge blockers up, you can attack the weaker opponent, and then even that big threatening opponent is still losing life. So Sanctum Seeker is often a card I tutor for when I'm tutoring for a vampire, just because I want to end the game quicker, you know. And wow, what a fabulous ability, especially when you get so many vampires out with Edgar Markov. Vampire Nighthawk, classic 2/3 Death Touch flying lifelink vampire shaman for 1 of anything and 2 black. So not a lot to say except for just one of the best vampires ever made, a classic. And you know, whenever it comes out, people are like, oh boy, now I can't attack because he's got a Death Touch blocker. But also having flying and lifelink, just, oh man, 3 abilities on this guy. How could it not be good? Mavrin Fane, Dusk Apostle. Legendary Vampire Cleric. Whenever one or more vampire, non-token vampires you control attack, create a 1/1 white vampire creature token with lifelink. And he's a 2/2. So this card usually, so unfortunately it only gets one per attack phase. But still, it's just adding on more little guys. And there are other cards in the deck that are, can double that many tokens, which is great. But also just, again, having lifelink is really relevant in a deck where often you're paying life to do things. So, Maverick Dusk Apostle, I've never regretted playing him. He's done great things for the deck. Captivating Vampire is 1 of anything and 2 black. And it's just a vampire, unlike literally everything else we've talked about so far. Just plain old vampire, but it says other vampire creatures you control get +1/+1, and you can tap 5 untapped vampires you control to gain control of target creature. It becomes a vampire in addition to its other types, and Captivating Vampire is a 2/2. So the tap 5 untapped vampires you control even gets around Summoning Sickness because it's an ability that's on a card and it says, it's not saying tap this, it's not saying this needs to tap to do it. And so because of that, even Captivating Vampire can tap to activate the ability right when it comes out. It's just one of those sneaky rules in Magic that when something's printed and it's not saying itself to tap specifically, then literally anything that enters the battlefield can tap because it's on an ability of a different card than itself. It's just weird, but if you think about it for a minute, it makes sense. Alright. Obviously, I'm not much of a rules judge, but I know the rule. So, Olivia Valderin is a legendary vampire, and it has flying. She's a 3/3, and for 1 and a red, Olivia Valderin deals 1 damage to another target creature. That creature becomes a vampire in addition to its other types. Put a +1/+1 counter on Olivia Valderin. And then for 3 of anything and 2 black, you can gain control of target vampire for as long as you control Olivia Valderin. So she is a mythic rare because she does awesome things, and obviously because she's drinking some wine or blood. And she gains control of other creatures and turns them into vampires. I mean, what more flavor could you ask for? And what's really cool is that she doesn't have to tap to activate these abilities, so she can do them as many times as you have the mana and gain control of many, many creatures. Stromkirk Captain, another lord. Lords being things that give our other creatures of the same type +1/+1. So this is a lord with first strike, and it says other vampire creatures you control get +1/+1 and have first strike. So don't underestimate this card. Being a lord and giving them first strike is just double the trouble. And it's a 2/2 itself. Next is Drana, Liberator of Malakir, which also acts like a lord. It's a 1 of anything and 2 black for a legendary vampire ally with flying and first strike. And it says, whenever Drana, Liberator of Malakir, deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature you control. And she's a 2/3. So the interesting thing with this card is that it has first strike. So she deals the first strike damage to the player first, and before all your other creatures deal their damage, they get the +1/+1 counters. So that's the best thing. She deals her damage before she gets a +1/+1 counter, but all your other creatures without first strike, they get the +1/+1 counters before they end up dealing their damage. So that's the really cool thing about first strike and double strike. Alright, so that's Drana. Butcher of Malakir. This card I just put back in. I often take this card out because I like to put in, Dictate of Erebos or the other one that's cheaper. But, Butcher of Malakir is a vampire, so I got him in here because I can tutor for him with things that can tutor for vampires. But the one thing I don't like about Butcher is that he's 7 to cast. I mean, so often you sit on this card forever. And then when you got 7 mana finally, you're like, well, I'd rather cast 3 different spells than just spending it all on this one guy. But Butcher does great things, and you really do need him in this deck for times when you need a vampire that's going to that you can use to eliminate your other opponent's creatures. And so this is your vampire that's kind of a board wipe in itself, because it can happen multiple times. Other vampires destroy creatures, but they only really do it once. Butcher Malakir is your vampire that can just wipe your opponent's boards over and over again, especially when combined with something like Viscera Seer. So definitely required in the vampire deck. 5/4 flyer too isn't bad. Sky Marcher Aspirant also has Ascend. And so Sky Marcher Aspirant says if you have the City's Blessing, it has flying, and it's a 2/1 for 1. So it's a good, 1-drop filler in this deck for sure. Because you're going aggro, this can get bigger, it gets pumped up with +1/+1 counters, and it's your flyer, so having evasion is always so good. Rakish Air is a 2/2 vampire, and it's for 2 of anything and 1 red, and it says whenever a vampire you control deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Excellent. So it's kind of a big theme in this deck is the +1/+1 counters for sure, and it might be a good idea for me to put in cards that say, creatures with +1/+1 counters get blah blah blah. Now here's another one. Yeheni, Undying Partisan for 2 of anything and 1 black. It's a legendary Aetherborn vampire. That's a 2/2 haste, and it says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And you can sacrifice another creature to give Yeheni indestructible to the end of the turn. So another good sack outlet. Always good to have a sack outlet in pretty much any deck. Anger. Here's the thing you might just sack right away. So one of the very few non-vampire creatures in this deck. Anger is just a great card in almost any red deck. So Anger is an incarnation, a 2/2 incarnation creature, 3 of anything and 1 red, and it has haste. And it says, as long as Anger is in your graveyard and you control a mountain, creatures you control have haste. So it's a way of getting haste, and for your opponents to not really be able to get rid of it because it's in your graveyard, unless they exile your graveyard. So Anger is really good in this deck. Paladin of Atonement is 1 of anything and 1 white, and it's a vampire knight. And it says at the beginning of each upkeep, if you lost life last turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Paladin of Atonement, and when Paladin of Atonement dies, you gain life equal to its toughness. So it gets you life gain, and it's just really, it's one of these, not the greatest card, but it fits the creature type. It does gain you life. It does get +1/+1 counters. It fits the theme, so this can get potentially big, and it'll gain you some life. And when compared to other two drop choices, I just thought this was the better choice. So Paladin of Atonement really does fit the deck well. Bloodline Keeper. This is a great card for 2 of anything and 2 black. 3/3 flying vampire that says tap it to put a 2/2 black vampire creature token with flying onto the battlefield. And then you can pay 1 black to transform Bloodline Keeper. Activate this ability only if you control 5 or more vampires. So Bloodline Keeper transforms into, not Perforos, but Lord of Lineage, which is a 5/5 flying vampire, and it says other vampires you control get +2/+2, and you can tap it to put a 2/2 vampire creature token with flying on the battlefield. So it becomes a big nasty Lord of Lineage. So good. And as you just saw, we got Perforos in the deck. Yeah, not cheap, but man, so worth it in any red token-based strategy. Perforos. God of the Forge. 3 of anything and 1 red. Gets you a legendary enchantment creature god, who is indestructible, 6/5. As long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Perforos isn't a creature. But whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Perforos deals 2 damage to each opponent. And then his other ability's not bad too. You can pay 2 of anything and 1 red to give creatures you control +1/+0 until the end of the turn, and you can do that as many times as you have the mana for it. So that can really pump your team's power up. But more importantly, man, dealing 2 damage to each opponent for each creature that enters the battlefield just ends games. I actually run a Perforos deck where Perforos is the commander, and it is always over very quickly. probably the best mono-red commander in the format. Probably, in my opinion, the best monocolored commander in the format, for sure. So, Purphoros. Next, we got Bishop of Binding. When Bishop of Binding enters the battlefield, exile target creature an opponent controls until Bishop of Binding leaves the battlefield. And whenever Bishop of Binding attacks, target vampire gets +X/+X until the end of turn, where X is the power of the exiled card. I recently mentioned this in another video about talking about removal. And the problem is, you know, it doesn't count towards my removal slot because, you know, I mean, it doesn't count towards my removal spells when I'm building the deck and trying to count how many removal spells I have, because it's pseudo removal. You know, it's temporary removal, and you know, geez, this guy's got a toughness of 1, so really easy to kill. But you know, hopefully once you pump it up with +1/+1 counters, it will stick around and, you know, keep the exiled card away. But you know, it is good in the deck. You know, just having that temporary removal is something that helps a lot, and sometimes it, you know, it does last, and you get to remove that thing for a while. But at least removing it temporarily buys you time to build up your army some more, and so that's why I got Bishop of Binding into the deck. I think it is a great choice for the deck, even though, like I said, it doesn't last long. It will at least probably last long enough so you can, you know, rebuild your army. Patron of the Vein is a vampire shaman. That's a 4/4 flyer, and to cast it you got to pay 4 of anything and 2 black. And it says, when Patron of the Vein enters the battlefield, destroy target creature an opponent controls, and whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, exile it and put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire you control. So another +1/+1 counter synergy, another removal spell. This does fit into my removal slot because it says just destroy target creature, and so that creature hopefully never comes back. Patron of the Vein. Stromkirk Noble. This one is underestimated for sure, but it is a great addition to the 1-drop slot in this deck. And the little bit of evasion is relevant because there are a lot of humans out there. So Stromkirk Noble is 1 red to cast, and it's a vampire that says Stromkirk Noble can't be blocked by humans. And whenever Stromkirk Noble deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So again, more +1/+1 counters, a little bit of evasion, a great 1-drop. Forerunner of the Legion, which is 2 of anything and 1 white to cast. It's a vampire knight. When Forerunner of the Legion enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a vampire card, reveal it, then shuffle your library and put that card on top of it. Whenever another vampire enters the battlefield under your control, target creature gets +1/+1 till the end of the turn. And it's a 2/2, and so it tutors up a vampire. Like I was saying, more often than not, I'm going to be tutoring up Sanctum Seeker. You know, a lot of the time. That's one of my choices a lot. Or, you know, just the 2-drop lords are good choices. And then the next ability is great too. Just let's pump them up even more. Give it +1/+1 to the end of the turn. Blood Crazed Paladin. I just put this card in. I've never got the opportunity to cast it at flash speed and give it +1/+1 counters, but I'll tell you, somebody did it to me yesterday, and this thing was huge. It was like a 10/10, and I was just like, wow. I think that will work actually in the deck. And I had another card that wasn't working very well, so this ended up filling the slot nicely for only 2 mana, 1 of anything and 1 black. It has flash, and it's a 1/1, but when it enters the battlefield, it enters with a +1/+1 counter for each creature that died this turn. So right after a board wipe, you cast this, and you are left with a huge creature for only 2 mana. 2 mana. 2 mana that you gotta hold on to for a while, though. That's the only thing. You gotta be patient. And here's the true star of the deck, Vampire Nocturnus, which is 1 of anything and 3 black mana, which is hefty. But what Vampire Nocturnus says, besides being a 3/3, it's play with the top card of your library revealed. As long as the top card of your library is black, Vampire Nocturnus and other vampire creatures you control get +2/+1 and have flying. Yeah, that is busted. You know, they get evasion, they get +2/+1 and have flying. So, you know, having +2/+1 is nothing to shy at, alright? It's way better than +1/+1. So now on to some non-vampire spells, some more just draw spells. Necropotence, 3 black to cast an enchantment that says you skip your draw phase. If you discard a card from your hand, remove that card from the game, and at any time you may pay 1 life to set aside the top card of your library. At the beginning of your next discard phase, put that card into your hand. Effects that prevent or redirect damage can't be used to counter this loss of life. So this is an older version of the card, but basically what those so many words are trying to say is you may pay that 1 life, and at the end of your draw step, draw a card for each 1 life that you paid. So you could pay 30 life and draw 30 cards at the end of your turn. You do skip your draw phase, and you do still have to discard, but, I mean, drawing 30 cards is often going to get you the card you want. So, great card. Then we got Skull Clamp, which is fabulous in any creature, in any token-based deck, especially ones that make little 1/1s like our deck does. So for 1 of anything, you get to cast this artifact, and it says equipped creature gets +1/-1, and whenever equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards, and it's only equipped 1. So lots of times you're just paying 1 mana to draw 2 cards with this guy. Sure, you're sacrificing your guy, but, you know, especially when you got something like Butcher or Malakir, you know, you're getting lots of value off of Skull Clamp. Phyrexian Arena is, I don't know if it's better or just as good, so I'm going to say just as good as Necropotence. 1 of anything in 2 black, and it's an enchantment that says at the beginning of your upkeep you draw a card and you lose 1 life. I put this in literally every single black deck that I own. Just drawing 2 cards at the beginning of your upkeep is awesome. You have 40 life in Commander, which means, yeah, if Phyrexian Arena ends up drawing you 40 cards, I think you'll be fine. You'll probably have something to gain that life back, hopefully. Vanquisher's Banner. This is great for any tribal deck. Any tribal deck really needs this one. So it's 5 of anything, and to cast an artifact, as Vanquisher's Banner enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1, and whenever you cast a creature spell of the chosen type, you draw a card. So in this deck, whenever you're casting a vampire, you're drawing a card, and all your vampires get another +1/+1. There's so many creature buffers in this deck, you know, pumping these vampires up. It's really scary. So now on to the mono rocks. We got the Signets, all of them. Not in order apparently, but yeah, we got the Orzhov Signet. We got the Mardu Banner to add, you know, 1 of any Mardu colors. Also, sack it to draw a card, always good. Commander Sphere. My roommate actually won with this card the other night. You know, he just needed 1 more mana to cast Duragaz, and he just didn't have that land. And I was like, well, you know, you can tap Commander Sphere to float a mana, then sacrifice it to draw a card, and maybe that card will be an untapped land. And it was, and he cast Duragaz and won the game. So Commander Sphere really goes great in any commander deck. Darksteel Ingot. It's 3 of anything for an artifact that's indestructible and adds 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Great in any commander deck. Gilded Lotus. 5 of anything for an artifact that taps for 3 mana of any color. Great in any commander deck. Cultivator's Caravan is awesome in this deck because the crew cost is really easy to activate, you know, when you got so many little creatures out and you're pumping your creatures so easily. So Cultivator's Caravan is just 3 of anything for a 5/5 vehicle that taps to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, has crew 3. So tap any number of creatures you control with total power 3 or more, and this vehicle becomes an artifact creature until the end of the turn. So yeah, I mean, if you got 3 1/1 vampire creature tokens, tap them, and suddenly you now have 5 power instead of just 3. Really cool card. And Soul Ring. Whatever. There's the other signets. We got Boros Signets. Sword of the Animist. 2 of anything for a legendary artifact equipment. It says equipped creature gets +1/+1. Whenever equipped creature attacks, you may search your library for a basic land card and put it in onto the battlefield tapped. Then shuffle your library, and it's equipped 2. So this card is great for any aggro deck, but I mean almost any deck that doesn't have green. This is a fabulous choice for ramp slot in your deck, and it's got a pretty picture of Nissa on it too. So get it, man. Any non-green deck, you really need Sword of the Animist to add that splice of green into your life. There's the other signet, Rakdos Signet. Okay, so moving on to removal. Path to Exile. One white to cast, and it's exile target creature. Its controller may search his or her library for a basic land card. Put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle his or her library. So, I mean, this, there's not a lot to say, but except for that it's one of the most powerful removal spells in the format, and if you're playing a white deck, you might as well spend money on one. There's just 1 mana, instant speed, exile target creature forever, and all they get is a land. Great card. Kindred Dominance, perfect in almost any black deck, really, just as a budget board wipe. Choose a creature type, destroy all creatures that aren't of the chosen type. It's a sorcery for 5 mana and 2 black. So obviously in this deck we're choosing monkeys, no, vampires. More removal, Crackling Doom, which is 1 of each of the Mardu colors, red, white, black, and it's an instant, which is important. And it says Crackling Doom deals 2 damage to each opponent. Each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures he or she controls. So the 2 damage is just a little bit of icing on the cake, but the real great thing here is each opponent has to sacrifice basically their biggest creature. Return to Dust. 2 of anything and 2 white. Exile. These are starting to slow down now. There we go. So 2 of anything and 2 white. Exile target artifact or enchantment. If you cast this spell during your main phase, you may exile up to 1 other artifact or enchantment. And it's instant speed. And so one of the more powerful artifact and enchantment removal spells in the format, just because it gets to remove 2 of them in 1 spell. So just going to adjust this real quick. And here we go. Alright, continuing. Merciless Eviction. Okay, there we go. 4 of anything and 1 white, 1 black. Choose 1. Exile all artifacts, exile all creatures, exile all enchantments, or exile all planeswalkers. Sorcery speed, but this is an awesome card, awesome artwork. And I've never seen the last one chosen. I got really close to choosing it the other day before I just lost the game. But if I didn't lose that game, I was going to choose exile all planeswalkers. That would have been so funny. But man, this is one of the most powerful removal spells in the game. If someone's playing a sliver deck where everything's indestructible, hexproof, the only thing you can do practically is play Merciless Eviction. In Garrick's Wake, 7 of any color and 2 black for a sorcery that says destroy all creatures you don't control and all planeswalkers you don't control. Kindred Charge. So now we're just getting into some more random cards that are really good, but that just make the deck more powerful, but aren't filling any of the technical slots, any of the utility slots. So Kindred Charge is 4 of anything and 2 red, and it says choose a creature type. For each creature you control of the chosen type, create a token that's a copy of that creature. Those creatures gain haste. Exile them at the beginning of the next end step. I've definitely had this card just win the game for me before. Absolutely, especially when you have something like Anointed Procession, which is in here somewhere. Yeah, Kindred Charge. Awesome card. True Conviction. This is fabulous. Fabulous. Definitely something you should consider for any white deck, any deck with white, depending on your strategy, but definitely in aggro, it is a must-have. So True Conviction's an enchantment for 3 of anything and 3 white. Creatures you control have double strike and lifelink. Right, gain all that life back that you spent to draw cards with Necropotence. Stensia Masquerade is 2 of anything and 1 red for an enchantment that says attacking creatures you control have first strike, and whenever a vampire you control deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it has Madness for 3. So I've seen this card played in non-vampire decks all the time, and it just fits this deck so perfectly because this card, I've also seen it used in other non-vampire decks just to give all their attacking creatures first strike. You know, it's a decent 3-drop enchantment. So, great addition to the Edgar Markov deck. Continuing on to the Planeswalkers, and some other cards too, but Planeswalkers are really good in this deck because this deck has lots of little chump blockers. You know, it's got little creatures that can block for the Planeswalker. So Sorin, Grim Nemesis, is the, I think he's the nephew of Edgar Markov. Anyway, it's a Planeswalker for 4 of anything and 1 white and 1 black, and it says, for +1, reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. Each opponent loses life equal to its converted mana cost. So because of that ability, this is filling up a card draw slot in my card draw cards for this deck. It also enters with 6 loyalty counters, I forgot to mention, which is a lot and is hard to get rid of. And yeah, you get to draw a card, and each opponent loses life equal to that card's converted mana cost, which is great. -X, Sorin Grim Nemesis deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker, and you gain X life. And for -9, put a number of 1/1 black vampire knight creature tokens with lifelink onto the battlefield equal to the highest life total among all players, which is probably going to be you if you've been using the first ability a lot to get all the way up to 9. But yeah, I have done that once before, and I got 35 vampire tokens with lifelink. It was great. Next I got Nahiri the Harbinger, 2 of anything and 1 red and 1 white. Also like a card draw planeswalker, you know, you may discard a card. If you do draw a card, that's the first ability for +2. She enters with 4 loyalty counters. Her other abilities are -2, exile target enchantment, tapped artifact, or tapped creature. And -8, search your library for an artifact or creature card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. It gains haste. Return it to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So, yeah, you get your most powerful vampire, sometimes Butcher of Malakir, sometimes Sanctum Seeker, sometimes you just grab your Legion Lieutenant just to pump everyone up, and you put it on the battlefield. Yeah, awesome card. Campaign of Vengeance. Whenever a creature you control attacks, defending player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So I'm just making them lose that life all the more quicker. You know, you're playing aggro, so you want to get things done quickly, and so you want them to lose their life quickly, and you know, everything that helps get them down from 40 to 0 is what it takes. You're probably not going to be winning with commander damage, though you can really with Edgar Markov. It's great when Edgar Markov comes down late in the game, you know, and you know, they think they've finished with all your little vampires, and they forgot that you still got the guy with Eminence ready to come out and deal 5 damage. Yeah, it says 4, but as soon as he attacks, he gets that +1/+1 counter, so he's really always at least hitting for 5 when he attacks. Demonic Tutor, alright? 1 of anything and 1 black for a sorcery. Search your library for any card and put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. So a tutor equals anything else in your deck, but I don't consider a tutor card one of your card draw cards. You know, when you're adding to your card draw slots, you want to have the tutor is just, you know, your answer for anything. It can become anything else. But I don't consider tutoring to be card draw in itself. It's card replacement, you know, but you're not coming ahead. You know, you're not gaining card advantage. Boros Charm, 1 red and 1 white. Choose 1. Boros Charm deals 4 damage to target player, or permanents you control are indestructible this turn, or target creature gains double strike until the end of the turn. So this instant is super powerful, making all your permanents indestructible, especially when you got a huge board, or, you know, just ending the game, dealing 4 damage. And honestly, I've even used the other ability lots of times, give a creature double strike. You know, you get Edgar Markov, huge, +1/+1 counters, give him double strike. Here's a card I feel like I should have mentioned earlier, Anointed Procession, 3 of anything and 1 white. If an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many tokens instead. I love it whenever something says effect. You know, that means literally anything. If absolutely for any reason you would get one or more tokens, and not just creature tokens, but, you know, they could be, you know, gold tokens or treasure tokens, clue tokens. You know, you get twice that many tokens instead. A great card. Tainted Remedy is an enchantment for 2 of anything and 1 black. It says if an opponent would gain life, that player loses that much life instead. Nasty. Everyone loves you when you play that one. Nim Deathmantle is an artifact for 2 of anything, and it says equipped creature gets +2/+2, has Intimidate, and is a black zombie. It has equip 4, but the really important ability on here is it says whenever a non-token creature is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay 4. If you do, return that card to the battlefield and attach Nim Deathmantle to it. So if you have enough mana, you can stack this ability and basically save your entire non-token board from a board wipe, or any of your creatures from dying just by paying 4 mana. Great ability. Elspeth, Sun's Champion. Yeah, what's that doing in here? You know, it's a white deck, and she is just a fabulous white planeswalker. So for 4 of anything and 2 white, you get a planeswalker that enters with 4 loyalty, and +1 is put 3 1/1 white soldier tokens onto the battlefield, which is crazy. You know, no other planeswalker puts 3 creatures out right away. That's why Elspeth is the jam, because she gets 3 creatures immediately out for +1. She gets up to 5 loyalty. For -3, destroy all creatures of power 4 or greater. All right, so none of those 1/1 soldiers are going to die. And, you know, not any of your, you know, chumpy vampires are going to die. You have a huge wide board, you know, going wide. This is fabulous with any go wide strategy. -7 is you get an emblem with creatures you control get +2/+2 and have flying. Yeah, I got that off once. It was great. Won that game. All right. Throne of the God Pharaoh is a legendary artifact for 2. And it has, at the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the number of tapped creatures you control. So just like Campaign of Vengeance, you know, we want just to drain our opponents as quick as possible. We want them to not be able to recover. And, you know, 40 life, like I said, is a lot of life to drain from everybody. So going aggro, you want to drain them of that life before they have a chance to really build up their board. Eerie Interlude is another, you know, way of rescuing our board. My rule in general, I want to say too, is, you know, cards that are good for you aren't as powerful as cards that are bad for your opponents. But you still want to run a couple of cards that are just good for you and your team. So this is a great one. Eerie Interlude, 2 of anything and a white. Exile any number of target creatures you control. Return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So save all your creatures. I don't believe this will work for tokens, though. Tokens will be gone. All right, continuing. Having trouble with the camera angles here. Teferi's Protection. This card came with the deck for sure, and it's the only deck that this card was printed in. The only set this card was printed in was Commander 2017 in the Vampires deck, which is so funny because it's a white card, which Teferi's normally, you know, mono blue. He's got splashed with white here and there. But then also it's Teferi in the Vampire deck. Okay, sure, yeah. Teferi and the Vampires apparently have the secret handshake going on. So in Teferi's Protection is an instant, which for 2 of anything and 1 white, it says until your next turn, your life total can't change, and you have protection from everything. All permanents you control phase out, and then exile Teferi's Protection. So it saves you for a turn. This card won't win you the game. It'll save you for 1 turn. For 1 turn, your life total can't change, and your board is safe. You know, if they're doing a board wipe, this will save you. More importantly, you kind of want to save this for when they're just about to kill you, and you need to last 1 more turn. But also, it is great for a board wipe, you know, because board wipes are sort of the deciding factor of Commander, honestly. Everybody's running board wipes. Sorry. And you really need to have them and plan for them. And if you can survive it and everyone else doesn't, then you're good to go. All right. Okay, so continuing on to the lands. So Forgotten Cave is a cycle land, and I think cycle lands really belong in like every commander deck. They are so good. All the cycling lands, they're great for when you're late in the game, you've got plenty of mana, and then you top deck another land card. But if that land has cycling, you can discard it and draw a card. So lots of new players really don't understand cycling. You know, they try to play the cycling card and then cycle it later or something. It's like, no, cycling, you do it while the card is in your hand, you pay the 1 mana, then you discard the card, meaning you discard it from your hand, and then you draw a card. So, man, for cycling, it has to be in your hand. Anyway, all these cycling lands are just great. So I got Forgotten Cave, Barren Moor is the black cycle land, and Secluded Steppe is the white cycle land, and there's more cycling lands. I don't have them all in here, but honestly, they are great for any strategy, even mono-colored strategies. Get the cycle lands. There's dual-colored cycle lands, too. Those are fabulous. Fabulous cards. I wish I had some of them in here, actually. But, yeah, I'm kind of going a budget mana base here because I have so many commander decks, I really just can't afford to buy all the mana for all of them. So that's where I kind of end up going budget, is on the lands. But, you know, it's a land, so why would you spend $200 for it if you're not playing Legacy or something like that? I don't know. So anyway, Path of Ancestry came with a deck, is great. Enters tapped, adds 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity, and when that mana is spent to cast a creature spell that shares a type with your commander, scry 1. All right, every vampire you cast with this lets you scry 1. Here's an expensive fetch land. Means that you tap it, pay 1 life, then you sacrifice it, and then you search your library for a swamp or mountain, put that card on the battlefield, and shuffle your library. Command Tower, great for any multicolored commander deck. Obviously not, you know, as good in 1-colored commander decks, because you want to save these for your multicolored commander decks. Add 1 mana to your mana pool of any color in your commander's color identity. And then I have these, they're called the bounce lands, right? These bounce other lands back to your hand. So the important thing to remember with these is that the lands that you're returning to your hand should be lands that have already been tapped for mana, and that enter again untapped. So Boris Garrison enters tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, return a land you control to your hand, and it adds both red and a white mana to your mana pool. In Commander, I think these lands are actually really good. They end up adding 2 mana to your mana pool for 1 land. The land that you get back to your hand will inevitably be played again. And so early game, you know, just the important thing to remember is early game, you can't count them really as a land in your hand unless you got plenty of others. If you only have this and 1 other land in your hand, you don't want to keep that opening hand. And, you know, if you just have this and another bounce land in your hand, you don't want to keep that opening hand either, because you can't even play either one of them. And the other annoying thing about the bounce lands, I should say, is that you wait to play them till the end of the turn, right? Because you say, oh, I want to tap that mana first. I want to tap that land before I return it to my hand. The problem with that is then so often I've done that and I forget to even play a land for the turn because I planned on playing it at the end of the turn, but instead I just end my turn and then I go, oh, I forgot to play my land drop. So what you want to do is play this card immediately, right? But you respond to it entering the battlefield by tapping the land that you're going to return to your hand and floating the mana from tapping that land. So you can play this land right away. You don't have to wait till you cast a spell to return it to your hand, to return the land to your hand, or to play this land. You can just play it right away and respond to its ability by tapping the land that you're going to return to your hand and floating that mana. And so you still have the mana. And then you don't forget your land drop. So I have all 3 of the bounce lands in here: Boros Garrison, Orzhov Basilica, and Rakdos Carnarium. And then I have all 3 of the temples, the Scry lands. Scry lands are really important, you know, just for card advantage. They are fixing your deck. You know, they don't get you more cards, but they get you the cards that you want. Scry is a very underrated ability. Look out for Scry and use it. It fixes your deck. So look at the top card of your library. You may put that card on the top or the bottom. Oh, you may put that card on the bottom. Yes, you get to do what you want with it. So you got the Temple of Triumph, Temple of Malice, and Temple of Silence. Unclaimed territory, essential for any tribal strategy, right? Choose a creature type. You get to add mana to your mana pool of any color to spend that, to cast that creature type. Or you can just add colorless. So, you know, why not put it in your tribal deck? Not an expensive card. Bojuka Bog, this card should go inside of every single black deck strategy ever. Goes in every black deck. And what's funny is I see a lot of players playing other formats, like in 1v1 formats. They're playing things like Tormod's Crypt, to deal with graveyards. And I say, why not actually just have 4 copies of Bojuka Bog in your sideboard instead of Tormod's Crypt? Because then, you have an extra land. It's also great against land destruction to have lands in your sideboard. And this is... It's not even a spell, so people aren't going to counter it like they will the Crypt. And I think it's definitely a better choice, and it's very budget, very cheap card. There's literally no reason for you to not go out and buy like 1,000 of these cards right now. Bojuka Bog. Arc of Orazca. This guy's great. It has Ascend, which again means if you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. You can tap it to add a colorless, or you can pay 5 mana and tap it to draw a card. Activate this ability only if you have the City's Blessing. So this is what's called a mana sink. If you have extra mana lying around, why not use it to draw a card? Great card. Nomad's Outpost enters tapped, but it adds 1 of any Mardu colors. So, essential for a Mardu deck. Mutavault. This turns into a vampire, a 2/2 vampire. Actually turns into an everything. So, if anyone else is playing any kind of creature synergies like slivers or something, this will get all the sliver abilities. Considering the sliver says all slivers, which a lot of slivers do, which is always funny. So Mutavault, great card for any tribal deck. Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. I swear if I ever get a dog, I'm going to name it Yawgmoth. Alright, so each land is a swamp in addition to its other types. Yep. Yawgmoth's corpse is a wound in the universe. His foul blood seeps out, infecting the land with his final curse. Lord Windgrace. Yo, that's the new Planeswalker. Ha 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 ha. That's the new Planeswalker, Lord Windgrace. Yep. Continuing with the lands. We got Dragon Skull Summit. Just a second. This thing's falling over. Okay. So, you got Dragon Skull Summit, which enters, gives you black or red unless you already control a swamp or a mountain. Same thing with Clifftop Retreat, except it's a white or a red unless you already control a mountain or a plains. Contreforts de Umbrasang. Contreforts of Umbrasang, something like that. I don't know. I got the French version because it's so easy to understand. I mean, this is basically like a signet, but it's a land. You tap 1, and then you tap it to add both black and a red to your mana pool. So it's a mana-fixing land. Great card. Terramorphic Expanse, it's an Evolving Wilds. Great in any multicolored commander deck, honestly, because it gets you exactly the basic land that you want. I see people playing these all the time. Don't underestimate them just because they're budget, They're reprinted all the time. That's why they're cheap, but they're reprinted all the time because they're a good card, because they're a good strategy. So there you go. And they got Inspiring Vantage. Enters tapped unless you control 2 or fewer other lands, and it adds red or white. And Concealed Courtyard enters tapped unless you control 2 or fewer other lands, adds a black and a white. Smoldering Marsh enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands, and adds a red or a black. And this one's actually a Swamp Mountain. So, I have just kind of a weird mix of multicolored lands in here, but these all have worked great. Never have failed me. Vault of the Archangel adds 1 colorless, or if you tap 2 of anything and a white and a black and tap it, creatures you control gain Death Touch and Lifelink till the end of the turn. So basically for paying 5 mana, creatures you control gain Death Touch and Lifelink. And when you combine that with cards like Stensia Masquerade or Stromkirk Captain, all your creatures also have First Strike, which is super powerful. First Strike Death Touch, that basically means everything always dies and your creatures don't unless they have like Indestructible. And then we got the basics. We got, I think, 3 mountains, 4 plains, and then 3 swamps. Yeah, I have more plains than any other basics. But that's everything. That's the end of the deck. So hey, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, subscribe, and let me know what you think. And I just want to give a shout out to Wedge at the Monosaurus, and to the guys at the Command Zone and at the Commander's Brew podcast. I love your guys' show, and I hope you watch mine. And not to mention, Strictly Better MTG. Watch that all the time. Great stuff. And so, until next time, guys, take care. Take it easy.